On today's episode of Region Talk, we present part 2 of a 2-part series featuring a conference hosted by Harvard University entitled Universities and Slavery, Bound by History. This conference explores the historical ties between universities and slavery. The conference was held at the NAFL Center at Harvard University in Boston, Massachusetts on March 3, 2017. The featured panel included a presentation from the Vice-Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, and was moderated by Professor Alejandro de la Fuente, Director of the Afro-Latin American Research Institute. Other panelists included Dr. Max Price, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, and Madame Christiane Taubira, Congresswoman and former Minister of Justice of France.
Madam President, colleagues, and friends, good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be a part of this discourse, this conversation, and to speak from the perspective of the Caribbean and to give voice to my identity as the Vice-Chancellor of the only regional university in the Caribbean, the University of the West Indies, which, as you know, has 3 landed campuses in Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and university centers scattered all across the region. A university that has been a part of this epic Caribbean struggle against slavery and colonization, a part of this enlightenment journey of Caribbean peoples who have been very intolerant and rebellious within the context of this history, whether from the traditions of marronage that covered the entire region through to the Haitian Revolution, where the people of the Caribbean were the first in this hemisphere to uproot slavery, remove it, and criminalize it, through to all of the other revolutionary struggles in the Caribbean for justice and for democracy. This university I lead is a part of this history. It originated in the workers' revolution of the 1930s, where the people stood up against British colonization, demanded an end to the colonial regime, and stood up for democracy, for social justice. The British government responded to this by establishing a university college, which originated as a college of the University of London in 1948. So that is the nature of the university's origin. But by 1963, we had decolonized that relationship and declared an independent University of the West Indies, independent of the University of London. The journey, of course, is not over. There are still colonial relationships in the Caribbean. There are still colonies of France. There are colonies of America, colonies of England. The majority of our societies, yes, have been decolonized, but there are still some outstanding communities across the archipelago that are still trapped in the colonial relationship. And everywhere, the legacy of slavery is not only immediate, but very aggressive in its agency. And so for us, the entire environment, the ecology of our existence is surrounded by these institutions rooted in slavery, built by slave owners. Whether there are physical structures, ideological structures, we are still surrounded by it. And for us, slavery is not remote. It is immediate, it is pressing. There are still people in our region whose great-grandparents were born in a slavery circumstance. But our campuses are located in the most beautiful environments. This is an image, a Google map of the campus in Barbados. As you can see, it's a beautiful campus overlooking the ocean, but surrounding a cricket field, which is the quintessential British model of building a campus with a cricket field at its core. That is a model derived from the classical British tradition. That is an image of the Barbados campus at Cave Hill, where I had the pleasure to be the provost there for 15 years. This is an image of the Jamaica Campus, the Mona Campus, the long, beautiful Queensway leading into the heartland of the campus with the magnificent Blue Mountains of Jamaica in the background. But it's important to realize, though, that these beautiful environments, these really wonderful, charming, and picturesque communities, all of these campuses are built on lands that were slave plantations. Here at Mona, the beautiful Mona campus, this was the lands occupied by the Mona sugar plantation, where hundreds of enslaved peoples toiled and were buried. We have the list of all of those enslaved persons who were emancipated with the British Act in 1833. We have excellent documents of all of these people who were the last among the enslaved on the Mona estate, the land we now occupy as the Mona campus of the university. And as you can see here from these images, the vast majority of these enslaved persons were described as Creole, that is, born in Jamaica, as opposed to imported from Africa. It's a very long list, and I will not go through this. But our campus at Mona is associated also with all of the traditions of crimes against humanity that we are now treating with. The indigenous peoples who experienced genocide under the Spanish colonial project, they also lived on the land that is now the Mona campus. And here are some shacks. These were buildings that were constructed on the land that became our campus to house those Jewish refugees who were able to escape the Third Reich. And these structures were built to rehabilitate some of those Jewish people who fled through Gibraltar and found their way into the hands of the British. The British took care of them and brought them here to this land site. And there are many prominent members of the Jewish community whose parents were actually housed in these structures before the structures evolved into the university. So we have the history then on our Mona campus, not only of indigenous slavery, but also African slavery, and also indeed the Holocaust against the Jewish community. This is a structure that was designed to accommodate the Jewish refugee camp. And here you can see Jewish persons in this facility in the mid-1940s. This is an image of the campus chapel, which was built by enslaved persons first as a sugar mill. In the 18th century, this was a mill of the sugar estate, which was dismantled, and the stones were brought from the Jamaican countryside to the Mona campus and reconstructed as a chapel. So from a sugar mill, which was destructive of the lives of enslaved Africans, to a Christian chapel of reflection. These are some of the ruins that still exist on the campus, the legacies of the slave estate. But here is an interesting image. This is an image of the new medical faculty complex, which was constructed 4 years ago. It's a beautiful facility built on the campus because the university campus here started in 1948 as a medical faculty. And some 6 years later, we decided to build a state-of-the-art teaching and research complex. But while we were doing this, or while we were getting ready to do this, something extraordinary happened on the campus. The contract was allocated. A major Chinese multinational firm won the contract to build this complex. And they came on the site and were preparing to excavate the foundations to do what they had to do. And guess what? The bones began to come up from the earth. We then discovered that this facility was about to be constructed on the burial ground of the enslaved Africans. And no one knew that this was the site, the ceremonial site. This was a site where hundreds of Africans were buried in unmarked graves on the soil. Of course, we had to stop the construction. We did all of the excavations. We removed all of the bones of these ancestors. We took them out. We did what was necessary and what was appropriate. And then we constructed a memorial on the site. And there you can see Danny Glover, who was a part of that conversation. And here now we have a memorial with the names of all of the enslaved Africans that we were able to find in the records on this monument. I moved to the Barbados campus. The Barbados campus at Cave Hill, also built on a slave plantation, or a series of slave plantations. Celebrating the 50th anniversary of this campus 4 years ago, we carried out a major analysis, historical analysis of the community that now constitutes the campus. We were able to identify all of those, or most of those enslaved Africans who worked on that land that is now the Cave Hill campus of the university. This is a major publication that sets out this history. And here is a monument on the campus, on the periphery of the campus overlooking the Caribbean Ocean. And this monument is called Quaw's Quest. Why Quaw? We discovered that in 1793, a 3-year-old child from the Congo was sold into slavery in Barbados on the auction blocks in Bridgetown and was bought by the owner of the land which we now occupy as our campus. The gentleman who bought young Quaw, he had a 3-year-old white child and he wanted a toy for his child, and so he bought Quaw. Quaw grew up on this land, and it was soon discovered that he was a remarkable and phenomenal child. And so he acquired literacy through his own efforts. And at emancipation in 1834, we discover that Quaw is now a teacher of children on the estate. The Church of England built a chapel on the land, and Quaw was invited to become the sexton of the chapel, becoming the first black sexton of an Anglican church anywhere in the world. He's now a teacher, conducts Sunday school classes for the kids on the estates. In this sense, therefore, Quaw becomes the first teacher. He becomes the first teacher and academic of the Cave Hill campus. So we see him as our ancestor. He is the first to be involved in the profession of teaching. And not bad for a child who was thrown into slavery at the age of 3. His parents were killed in the raid on his village. And now we memorialize Kwa on the campus. And in the background there of that symbol are plates made of fiberglass with the names of all of the enslaved persons who worked on the soil that is now the Cave Hill campus. And these are the list of all of those enslaved Africans, where they were born, whether in Africa, in Barbados, and other islands of the Caribbean, their names, their profession, their color, all of that. So we have all of these lists, males and females, children, boys and girls, and we see Kwa there at emancipation. These are the huge books that carry their names so that students can leave the classroom, go to Kwa's monument, and see the journey of their ancestors on that space that is now the campus. And why do we call it Kwa's Quest? He died in the cholera epidemic of 1854, and while in his last hours of life, he gave his testimony to the local priest, and he said, well, I was brought here as a child without a family. Now I'm a teacher, I'm a free man, I have a wife, I have 4 children, my quest is complete. And so we call this monument Kwa's Quest. But we did not end there in this process of engaging the environment in rehabilitation. We did not end there. 6 years ago, the task, it was my responsibility to construct a new administration building on the campus. I assembled a team of architects and I said, okay, we are now going to build a facility on this campus that represents the administrative function of the institution. And we thought, why not design our administration building with the architectural motif of the African golden stool, the golden stool of the Ashanti. The golden stool of the Ashanti, the first rebellion on the island of Barbados. The first attempted revolt was 1675. An Ashanti man by the name of Kofi was meant to become the king of Barbados. Destroy the slave owners, destroy slavery. Kofi was going to be installed in the ceremony of state, and he would become King Kofi of Barbados in classical Ashanti fashion. They had a stool made of wood, and he was meant to be installed on the 12th of June, 1675, when the revolt had succeeded. Well, they did not succeed. Kofi was beheaded and burnt alive, he and all of his followers, and the stool they had made of wood for this ceremony was also burnt. We took the decision, the bold decision, of giving King Kofi his stool. And now Barbados, the Cave Hill campus, on a land built for slavery and plantation, now the home of the campus, King Kofi of the Ashanti now has his golden stool. And there we go, the golden stool of King Kofi. When this structure was completed, the vast majority of people in Barbados assumed it was a Chinese building. So detached were the citizens from their history, their Ghanaian roots, and the vast majority of the Africans on the island are from what we now call today, or what was called then the Gold Coast. The majority were Asantes, Gas, and Fantis. This would have been a common symbol for their ancestors. The ancestors would have known immediately what this represented. But the descendants do not. So detached they are from their history, so detached they are from their historical cultural roots, which is fundamentally one of the crimes of slavery, to be detached from your roots. And now the school children come to the campus on a weekly basis to receive historical lessons in their African history and culture, and to understand the significance of this structure as a proud symbol on a campus where thousands of enslaved Africans worked and died. And allow me to say in conclusion that we didn't end there with the management of the physical environment. Our teaching, our research, our public advocacy, our professional training, we engage this history every day. Our university sees itself as part of that mandate to clean up the legacies of slavery. All we do, we confront it, we engage it, we are cleaning this up, whether it's in the area of public health, diabetes, hypertension, whether it's in the issues of anti-poverty, all the issues, all the legacies of slavery. This university engages these legacies daily. This is where our resources are allocated. And we have taken one final step. 3 months ago, the University of the West Indies established the Institute for Reparations Research. This institution came in against the background of the establishment of the Caribbean Commission for Reparations. We are going to construct the evidentiary basis for the reparatory claim, which will be made against all of those empowering institutions and governments of Western Europe, including, of course, the financial institutions, all of those who were criminally enriched in this process of enslavement. And so this institute is seen as a critical step towards the process of developing a social justice pedagogy within the university. And we really do hope it will be a part of a global network of similar institutions that will help us to move this conversation forward. I thank you.
So we have now live from South Africa, Vice Chancellor Price, who will speak to us live for a few minutes. Can you hear us?
I can indeed. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and I enjoyed, let me greet you and greet Sir Hilary and Madame Tabira. Thank you all for the opportunity, and thank you, President Faust, for the opportunity. In listening, I was connected already to listen to the video of my presentation, and I thought I had understood I needed to speak only for 10 minutes. So thank you for giving me just a few more minutes. As I watched my own video, I realized that in a short time, there was a risk of oversimplifying a number of issues, and so the opportunity just gives me an opportunity to highlight some nuances that I didn't. The first was in talking about decolonization and coloniality. Of course, the key challenge is what constitutes the colonial. What constitutes the colonial in, say, artworks, which, as we know, belies the way in which contemporary artworks are the sum of influences from many heritages and many sources. And so that when one comes to grappling with what it means to decolonize an environment, that becomes, of course, hugely contested, and there aren't easy answers. I think as I presented it, it sounded a whole lot simpler than that. The second, I think, is that students do not speak with one voice. There are many different views, and certainly many different views amongst Black students, and many Black students who would say of artworks that the purpose of art is to move one out of one's comfort zone. So while there will be some who will feel and take offense, others will say that's what art is about. And so then who gets to decide on a campus as diverse as we are and as one would expect to find in a country like South Africa, who gets to decide then, and how does one resolve what it means to be an inclusive environment? This relates from everything: architecture, names of buildings, artworks, curricula, role models. I think with respect to some of these, one of the lessons we've learned as the debates have proceeded is that as much of it resides in the question of curation and curation policy as in the artworks themselves. And that it is often not any individual artwork that is the problem, but the sum of them and how they are presented, and often decontextualized or not sufficiently contextualized. And the final point, thank you, that I'd like to add with the extra minute offered is that in reflecting on my talk, I think, again, I was in a shorthand trying to highlight it would have come across as a significant rupture from the pre-Rhodes Must Fall period to the post-Rhodes Must Fall period, as if prior to Rhodes Must Fall, there was no debate or no consciousness of this coloniality and no challenge of it, perhaps even a pride in a particular dominant culture. And that wouldn't be correct. Over many decades, in fact, those debates have been going on, and it's an interesting question but separate from this discussion about why this suddenly bubbled over in 2015, what the national dynamics were and the global dynamics. But there were certainly plenty of debates going on before. Perhaps the key shift was the success of transformation, that the number of Black students and Black faculty in the university had reached a critical mass where what was hegemonic culture could be more easily challenged, where people found their voice not only as individuals who had always found their voice, but as collectives, which surfaced the issues in very graphic and sometimes violent forms, and has resulted in the protest movements we've seen over the last 2 years. But thank you again for the opportunity to add a few comments, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Max. So we have limited time left, and I'm going to try to summarize some of the questions. We have received a few from the different audiences, including some from Twitter, which apparently can be used for good purposes. I didn't know that. And I'm going to start with a question that I think can actually be addressed by all of our panelists, and the question reads as follows. Madame Toubira spoke of how France's centralized governance made action possible. Can each of you reflect on the differences between action that comes from the top and action that begins at the grassroots? How are these forms different?
I try to answer with my English.
Your English is impeccable.
That is a light luggage. I do believe that it's very important that the citizens feel concerned by this topic, because it's about their lives, their history, our past. But let's go. Let's watch what was this past. It was public organization, states, public companies. It was a monarchian time. Maybe I must thank the Consul General de France who is here. Maybe he will help me between French and English. And I say that the ambassador is there too. I try to explain. Slave trade and slavery were organized by the state. It was a public activity. The societies were organized around this activity. It was a main economic activity. And moreover, there was at this time, in the European countries, there were every time wars between them, every time. The countries were not still stabilized. And all of them agreed that when they have a conflict, they call the Pope, the Vatican. You understand what I? And the Pope was the one who said, the king here and the king here who are fighting, you stop. Because I say that, I give you that, I give you that. That's what happened between Spain and Portugal when the Pope decided the Tordesillas Treaty, which divided South America, not only South America and Africa too, divided the West for the Portugal and the East for the Portugal and the West for Spain. So that's the way it was working at this time. The government, the monarchy, the Pope. So today, when we deal with this issue, we can't just do it between citizens, between associations, we need that the public power say something about it, organize a few things about it, such as teaching in the schools, in the university, and helping researchers, teachers to make research and to help us to understand, to know very well, and to understand. Not to be killed by that, but to feel stronger. To feel stronger, to understand that we are survivors, that we are invincible. I should say that we are immortal. How do you say that in English? Immortal. Okay? It's okay. Generation from generation, we are immortal. That means that we grow stronger, stronger, and stronger. The next generation stronger than the former one. That's the reality of this history. So we need the implication of the states to organize that, to make it penetrating the world society. That's what I think.
Thank you. You know, 3 years ago, the governments of CARICOM agreed to confront this history not only in respect of financial institutions, academic institutions, and the legacy of slavery and colonization, but to see how they can play a role in furthering what is really a civil society discourse. Governments had been reluctant to participate in this conversation for 100 years. As I said, we're still in the age in which the colonial structures are still very much a part of the Caribbean world. My friend here, I'm from Barbados. Just 15 minutes away from Barbados by flight is Martinique. You arrive at Martinique and there's an enormous oppressive sign at the airport which says, "Welcome to France." And we find that very offensive, you know, to arrive in the neighboring island and this "Welcome to France." That is extremely horrific for us who have fought for our independence and who have established our nations. Now, so there is this conversation of ongoing colonial aggression, but each time governments come on board, they do so not to initiate, they do so to join an existing conversation where public opinion has tilted in a certain direction. And in respect of confronting this history, I would say that for the better part of the 20th century, the political posture of most governments, colonial and the first generation of independent states, was let us forget the history and move on. There was this kind of pedagogy of forgetfulness. Let us put the past behind and let us move on. Civil society was saying, no, but we are living with this history every day. We need to deal with it. The governments were saying, no, let's move on. And we had this enormous rift between civil society and governments. Then suddenly the governments came on board because of a realization that you're caught in the trap. You do not want to look back, and you cannot go forward. And if you cannot move forward and you don't want to go back, where are you? And therein lies this conversation that it has to be addressed. And therefore, the question of all of these institutions, not only the academic institutions, but the churches. We are living in a world in which some of the largest slave owners in the Caribbean were clergymen. In Barbados, my island, the largest slave owner in the decade of emancipation was a Reverend John Brathwaite, well-known theologian. The Church of England, in its corporate identity, was the owner of 3,000 slaves on the island. It bought and sold them in many of the same way. The slaves were stamped C of E, Church of England, and they were stamped on the back, Church of England. So these are the histories, and yes, the academic discourse is apart, the university and slavery, the church and slavery, the banks and slavery, the industrial corporations and slavery. All of these major institutions in our ecologies were built upon slavery and sustained by it. So the university and slavery, is a part, an element of a wider conversation, which I hope we can also get to.
Max, would you like to add something?
No, thanks. I'm going to interpret the question perhaps a little more in the context of the theme of slavery and universities. And I think one of the challenges is within a university is the idea of academic freedom and the autonomy of universities. And so one question is, what should the role of government be in relation to universities when if it wishes to memorialize or to encourage debate or to perhaps push a particular line? For example, the law that we heard passed in France that every school child should have in their curriculum knowledge of the history of slavery is certainly an example of leading from the top and imposing from the top. I think that the universities in our environment would be very reluctant to be told what they have to teach and to have a central government determine a curriculum. Now, I know that the law probably applies to the schools, not to universities. I don't know if it does apply to the universities in France. But in trying to answer your question more directly, I think that with respect to universities, the question of authority, top-down, the autonomy of universities and the issues of academic freedom raise other issues which for me are very precious, core to the values of these institutions. And so I would not want to see that kind of central authority exercised. And in fact, I think it trickles down within the institution too. And part of the challenge for all of us as university leaders is that you can't it's not easy to lead from the top in the way you might in a corporate environment or in a political environment, to say we will transform the curricula in this way, or we will decolonize in that way, or we will reflect our relationship with slavery in the other, because academics themselves value and treasure the autonomy to teach what they want to teach and who they want to teach and how they want to do that. And so I think that the role of university leadership has to be much more one of mobilizing and persuasion and cajoling and building a consensus, building a movement. Certainly, if we look at how, in our own case, the debates around the Rhodes Statue and other examples that I gave, some have not been successful because we haven't been able to build sufficient support. Some quickly caught on, and many of the successes have become successes because they started as grassroots activities which gathered support, found a sympathetic ear, I think, in authority in most cases, but could not have been successful if it wasn't a dialectical process.
I think I have a slightly different approach to this issue. In our university's charter, there is reference to the institution being expected to be not only excellent but also ethical. And within this discourse of being excellent and ethical, and we have focused, generally speaking, as university administrators on the discourse about being excellent and all of the quality assurance systems we put in place, and we invest significant resources in the trajectory towards excellence. But we tend to get a bit soft, I think, around how we interpret the ethical part. Now, I believe that in respect of slavery, and colonization, apartheid, and all of these other crimes against humanity, we have exercised a very low level of expectation. And it has always been strange to me why, in respect of many of the crimes of the 20th century, for example, we showed a level of rage, and we don't show the corresponding rage in relation to slavery. I do not believe that any president or provost in this country would accept a monument of a Nazi general on their campus. I believe that if you examine the iconographic history of this country, in the first phase of nation building, all of the monuments of King George and the British generals were taken down. The Duke of Portland, the Duke of Marlborough, all of these British warmongers, all these generals were taken down from the public spaces, taken down from the public squares and from the campuses, because the nation was emerging and it was intolerant of British imperial symbols. Even the game I love, cricket, was removed from this country because Abraham Lincoln said, I have no doubt cricket is a greater game than baseball, but at last it will not serve our purposes. It is a British colonial product, it must go. Okay, so all of that took place in the first stage of nation building. Now we come to this stage and all the monuments of the slave owners are there. Why is there this tolerance? Why are we tolerating slave owners on our campuses and we don't tolerate British imperial generals on our campuses? Why do we take down King George and we cannot take down Jefferson? Why is that so? If we confront that fact and we say, okay, this is the second phase of American nation building, let us now look at how we deal with our environment. Those who say take down the monuments are not doing something for the first time. This is the second phase of monuments discussion. Very brief, please. And the first phase was very effective. I think that sometimes we hide behind our prejudices and we find very skillful academic reasons to say we must not act. We must not act, we cannot act because academic freedom, blah, 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 and so on, which I respect. But the threshold is always oftentimes too low on the questions of the black history. We set a low threshold. I would not be a part of a conversation that would defend those persons who committed atrocities against the Jewish people. I would not have those monuments on my campus. I don't think my students would. Those persons who committed crimes against the African peoples by enslaving them, that is the same threshold, the same level of threshold we hold for those who committed war crimes against the Jewish people. We hold that same threshold against those who committed crimes against the African peoples. And we keep a common standard. So I do not accept this notion that people like Cecil Rhodes, who was really, in fact, effectively a genocidal maniac, really. People like Cecil Rhodes can be defended by any principal or provost that we have Cecil Rhodes on our campuses because our intellectual freedom says let him stay. I'm sure that if you apply the same threshold that you have applied to the Holocaust against the Jewish people, to the African people, you would have a different conclusion. And I say one final point on this. When the Nuremberg trials were about to commence and the judges were having tremendous difficulty in litigating this crime against the Jewish people, there was no precedent in law for these crimes. There was no There was no jurisprudence they could use. There were no body of legal thought to guide them through this. And they were becoming a bit disillusioned. And one of them actually said, in the midst of their despair of not knowing how to proceed, we are walking into the desert, and somewhere out there is water. Let us go and find it. And with that metaphor, they moved through those trials and brought those persons to justice. Now, I believe that all of us who are leaders of university institutions, we are walking into the desert. And somewhere in that desert, there is an oasis we need to find. And I think we should brace ourselves, prepare ourselves, and walk into the desert. Thank you.
Let me move to the next question. Okay.
No, it's very important because I'm quite sorry, but yes. It's about the question of the government who says what to teach. It's not the point. I mean, what I said, what I explained about this law that compels the government to organize teaching of this history. It's not teach what the government thinks. It's putting it the agenda. And the teachers make their job. And in the same article, the government is compelled to finance research and cooperation in order to know exactly, to know this history, all these aspects of this history. So it's not a government that decides what people must know, but to stop not knowing anything about it, to stop that. Because it's very important for people to know, children and teenagers and people to know what is this history, because this history is the key to understand the present world. The present world. I mean, I'm not a Martiniquez, but I'm not sure there is Martiniquez in there. But let me tell you, we can wonder why. It seems to me that the chief of state in your country is still the Reine d'Angleterre, the Queen of Great Britain. And your countries and all the Caribbean countries belong to Commonwealth. Yes. That's at the 20th and 21st century, that's the trust, how do you say trust? Trust. Yes, trust of this history. And I don't think that stigmatizing a whole people is a way to escape of the traces of this history. So there are kind of links different between ex-metropole and ex-colonies, and that's the way it is. It's a question of collective destiny. It's not a question of judgment. When I say it's very important for the government to be involved in this history, in teaching the history, not the content, but the teaching and searching and knowing more and more. It's because it's at the level of a state you may have the means to know exactly what it was. It was violence. Sure, it was violence. It was quite awful, horrific. But it was resistance. It was resilience. It was creativity. It was music. It was art. It was literature. It was singing. Joy and happiness and fighting and crying and laughing. It was all that. And we have to know it. We have to understand all that. We have to know all these people bring to the whole humanity, you know? Languages, new religions, new hearts. And new music, jazz, blues, ragtime, soul, salsa, calypso, everything. We have to know that to understand what we bring. That's why we are invincible. But we have to know that. We have to share it. We have to give it to our children. So I can't do it myself. An association can't do it itself. We need the public means to know all this, to know how rich and how strong we are.
Okay.
I don't think we could have ended on a better place than this one. I want to thank the three panelists for being with us today. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask another question also.
My name is Dan Carpenter, and I teach in the government department here at Harvard, and I direct the social sciences academic ventures faculty director at Radcliffe. And I want to offer, before giving some thanks, two reflections on today, one personal and one professional. I learned so much today. This isn't my field of study, primary. But what I learned about actually my own past and listening to stories about Georgetown and other places was a way of putting together parts of a larger story. I grew up in a small town, very small town of about 800 people in northern Michigan, entirely white. I then went to college at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. I then went to graduate school at the University of Chicago, the south side of Chicago. And then my three academic jobs have been at Princeton, which we heard a lot about yesterday, University of Michigan, and now, of course, Harvard. I learned today that every place along the way of my own academic journey was spent at an institution that supported me,